But he and his group are being called Taliban, and they're not. They're nothing to do with the Taliban. I don't think there's probably even any operational cooperation.
Well, at the time when the Obama administration was just coming into power, they had all these think tank people leaking all these different trial balloons about the future of their plans for Afghanistan, and they talked about, well, maybe we could split al-Qaeda from the Taliban and say, look, just hand us over the Arab Afghan, last couple of dozen friends of Osama at the most, or whoever's left up there, and then we'll leave everybody alone. And then the other people said, no, we need to separate the Afghan Taliban from the Pakistani Taliban. And then the other guy said, no, we need to separate the extremist Taliban from the not-so-committed Taliban. And, then the Washington Post says, oh, no, we're accidentally chasing them up into Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Maybe we need to bomb them, too. And do you think that the people running the occupation, the reinvasion, I guess, the doubling down of the war there, know what they're doing at all? Have they picked one of these strategies or another one?
No, I think that the U.S. military in Afghanistan is quite confused as to what its mission is. And you see them say all kinds of things that seem contradictory. So, President Obama has more than once said that we're in Afghanistan to fight the Taliban and al-Qaeda. He there's couples the two. But then I've seen reports from anthropologists and others working in Afghanistan, security people and so forth, which question whether there really is any al-Qaeda to speak of left in Afghanistan. And, there might be a couple hundred Arab fighters, or at most 1,000. But it's not, what we would typically think of as al-Qaeda. It's an international organization plotting out attacks internationally. It's just some guys have ended up in Afghanistan, and, they're joining in with Hikmat Yar and the other dissidents who don't like the new Karzai government. But, so General Petraeus about a month ago gave a statement in which he acknowledged that there is virtually no al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But that's directly contradictory to the rationale for President Obama in having U.S. troops in Afghanistan, which was to fight al-Qaeda and the Taliban there. So, when you've got your highest officials not on the same page about what is the urgency of a war, this is a very bad scene.
Well, George Bush famously said back when he was the governor of Texas somehow that victory means exit strategy. And it's important for the president to tell us what the exit strategy is. And yet it doesn't seem like any of this is about an exit strategy. And you and I are sort of discussing things from the point of view of, wouldn't it be nice if somebody could shoot Zawahiri and then we could end this thing or something like that. But that's not the game here. The game here is to stay forever under one plan or another. If they got to keep switching them back and forth, that's fine too, right?
Well, I think it's just mission creep, Scott. I think they, NATO is there and the U.S. is there, and altogether there are now 90,000 foreign troops. The Soviets had 150,000, and they couldn't win. So what are you going to do with those 90,000 troops? And as you say, the number is growing. Well, the Europeans want out. But the thing I think is that weighs on everybody's mind in Washington and Brussels is if you pull all the foreign troops out, and then Gulbuddin Hikmat Yar takes over Afghanistan, and he invites Zawahiri to be his main man there in Kabul, then, you've got an international problem on your hands.
Yeah, you have to start the war all over again.
Yeah. So I think what they would like is to find a way to shore up the Kabul government to the point where they could leave and be fairly confident it just wouldn't collapse in their wake. I kind of, to get to with Afghanistan to the point that they probably are at in Iraq. And so I ultimately I think that's what's going on is that it's just to shore up the foundations of the new state to the point where they can leave, and that's why Obama and the Europeans are now putting such a big emphasis on civilian aid and provincial reconstruction teams, and they just want to get the infrastructure going and so on. The problem is that Iraq, is an oil country, and it has very substantial resources of its own, so that if you left, the government that controls those resources probably can make itself stick. But Afghanistan, after all these years of war, is just a basket case. So its gross domestic product is $9 billion a year. I mean, that's a rounding error in our bailout plan. It's nothing for a country. And its budget is like $1 billion a year. And it would cost $2 billion a year just to have a proper army. So, I look at the numbers, and I don't see the point at which the U.S. and NATO could withdraw and the place doesn't fall apart.
Right, and here their plan is to, I think it was the Washington Post I was reading last week, where they were talking about, well, it's going to take 10 years because we just don't have an awakening to buy off. I mean, we're going to have to make one from the ground up, and it's going to, and it's so clear that what they're describing is building up an Afghan state that couldn't possibly pay for itself. That would have to be on American welfare and under American occupation. If you call it invited bases or whatever, fine, but it would have to be something propped up by America forever. There's no legitimacy to the Karzai government. They can't rule that country. I mean, I'm from Texas, and I've driven across it a bunch of times, and Texas is huge. And that's how big Afghanistan is. And if there's a government that the people of Texas considered to be some foreign puppet that was attempting to control them, it would be absolutely impossible. And it's as simple as that. The same thing applies there, right?
Well, yeah, I hear your governor's not very happy about being in the union as it is.
Oh, well, come on, that's a bunch of, let me tell you about Rick Perry, okay? Rick Perry doesn't know nothing. Rick Perry is simply hairspray on top of a skull being, walking around making criminals money. He's not, ask Ron Paul for a principled take on secession. Don't ask Rick Perry. My dad used to say about Rick Perry, here's a Democrat turned Republican, never had a job in his entire life, and he walks around in $2,000 suits. How can this be?
Yeah.
Well, sorry, that's a little off the point, but you understand.
Yeah, I think your analogy is absolutely right, and people should understand that, 90,000 NATO troops in a place like Afghanistan are just never going to really be acceptable to the Pashtuns of the South, who, are traditionally the rulers of the country. They're 44% of the population. They're very nationalistic. And so, it's just not, I don't see the exit strategy, and I also don't see that the hope of building up a stable government is a very realistic one. But, with regard to just paying for an army, I think that could be done. We give, the United States gives Egypt $2 billion a year, half of it in military aid. And if we could get out of Afghanistan with that cost of, say, just ponying up $2 billion a year from now on, I'd take it. I think that would be all right. It would be a really, it wouldn't even be a big percentage of our foreign aid budget, and their foreign aid budget is tiny. Most people think it's huge. You ask most Americans, they think it's 25% of our budget or something, and actually it's just a pittance of pennies that we spend abroad. So
Did I hear you right that you would think that's perfectly fine for the long term? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I said that if you could get U.S. troops and NATO troops out of Afghanistan, and the price was just to allocate $2 billion a year to Afghanistan, the way we do with Egypt, for the medium to long term, well, why not? And that would be a bargain in my view, because the alternative is going to cost us trillions. Yeah,
well, I understand what you're saying. It's like, I'd prefer market anarchy, but I'll settle for the U.S. Constitution if I could really get that.
Yeah, Scott, there is no market in Afghanistan. It doesn't rise to the level of a market.
Oh, no, it certainly doesn't. The whole thing's a big scam. Let's talk about your article that you have. It's on Antiwar.com today. It's with Tom Engelhardt. I'm sure you can find it at TomDispatch.com as well. Paranoia about the Pashtuns. Armageddon at the top of the world, not. And so here's the thing. We've been talking this whole time about, what exactly it would take to subjugate these people forever or whatever it is. And yet you're really, in this article, taking on the whole opposite narrative, the Fox News way of looking at things. Bruce Rydell, I guess it was, you quote, the CIA guy, article in the Washington Times talking about how, this group of Taliban people, they really are a threat they could take over the whole world like the bad guy in a James Bond movie or something if we don't stop them. This is really, they're going to occupy North America and convert our sons and put burqas on our daughters and cut all our heads off, and we're all going to be slaves and that kind of thing if we don't get them first.
Yeah.
Is that? Yeah, I'm surprised that people really even are having that conversation at all, but I guess that's the conversation that they're having.